Hey gang, and welcome back. Today's patron shoutout is to Gubark Sabine. I hope I've said that right, and if I haven't, let me know, but otherwise, thanks for supporting the channel. In today's game, I am playing my Mistform deck, keeping Laboratory Maniac, 2 islands, Sword of the Animist, Gale Rider Sliver, Reliquary Tower, Washout. Maximus is playing his Akiri and Bruse Tarl deck, keeping 2 planes, Battlefield Forge, Clifftop Retreat, Mask of Avacyn, Fight to the Death, and Wyleth, Soul of Steel. Eric is playing his Baru Wormspeaker deck, keeping 2 forests, Castle Garenbrig, Sylvan Library, Garruk's Uprising, Beast Whisperer, and Brambleworm. And last but not least, we've got Mika rocking Kadena, keeping 1,000 Winds, an Island, Gift of Doom, Felwar Stone, Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, and a Myriad Landscape. I win that I roll, and start us off. Before we get into today's game, I want to talk about the sponsors for my channel. Card Conduit is the best way to sell your unused Magic cards. Whether you've got a box of unsorted bulk, or a complete and alphabetized set, there's a great option for everyone. With a payout averaging 19% better than using any one buy list, and that's after fees are applied, you can rest assured you'll get the best bang for your buck. If you're a skeptic like me, their easy customer service and detailed reports make the whole interaction transparent and safe. And if you use the affiliate link in the description below, or the promo code MTGMUDSTA, you'll save 10% off their fees. And 401 Games, Canada's one-stop shop for trading cards, board games, and hobby supplies. Not to mention an easy-to-use and great online buy list. And if you use the promo code MTGMUDSTA, your first purchase of MTG Sealed and Singles will be 5% off. And Dragon Shield, the strongest sleeves for your strongest deck. So be sure to use the code MUDSTA or the affiliate link down below to save 5% on your next order. I play an island and cast Gale Rider Sliver. Max plays a Fabled Passage. Eric plays a forest and passes. Mika's also got a forest return, but he taps it for a soul ring, and then taps the soul ring for an arcane signet. He then passes, and Max cracks his Fabled Passage for a mountain. I've got an island for turn, and cast Sword of the Animist. Moving to combat, I poke Mika for 1 with the sliver, and pass. Max has a Clifftop Retreat for turn, and he then pays 2 for a Mask of Avacyn. Eric plays his Castle Garenbrig, and then casts 3 visits, going to find a forest. He passes after that. Mika draws and plays an island. He's then able to cast a turn 2 Kadena, and then once she's out, casts a free morph creature and passes to me. My turn has me playing an island, and I then pay 2 to equip the sliver with the Sword of the Anime. Going to combat, I hit Mika for 2 this time, and get to go and find an island from attacking, and then pass. Max draws and plays a plains. He casts Wyleth, Soul of Steel, and passes to Eric after that. Eric's got a forest for turn, and then pays 2 for a Sylvan Library, and passes to Mika. Mika draws, and then plays another morph for free thanks to Kadena's ability, drawing again. He then plays a Myriad Landscape, and then casts Felwar Stone, and moves to combat. Mika swings Kadena at me, and the first morph creature at Eric, and we both take our hits. I play a Sliver Hive as my land for turn, and then cast a Tribute Mage, going to find a Reality Chip, which I put to hand. I then cast it, and I move to combat. I swing the Gale Rider Sliver at Max, getting another island, and dealing 2. Max plays a Battlefield Forge, and then equips a Mask of Avacyn onto Wyleth. Going to combat, he swings Wyleth at Mika for 3, and gets to draw a card from Wyleth's trigger, and Mika then takes the hit. Eric uses his library trigger during his draw step, and takes the full 8 to keep 3. He then plays a Beast Whisperer, and passes after that. Mika's got a Tainted Wood, and plays another morph creature for free, drawing a card, and then passing turn. I play a Mutavault, and then reconfigure the Reality Chip onto my Tribute Mage. I then go to combat, swinging the Gale Rider Sliver at Eric. I get an island, and then Eric takes 2, and I then pass turn. Max has a plains for turn, and casts Sword of Fire and Ice, and then casts Soul Ring once it's out. He then equips the sword onto Wyleth. Moving to combat, Max swings Wyleth at Mika, who responds by flipping up a Skin Thinner and killing the Beast Whisperer. He then sacrifices the Skin Thinner, flipping Gift of Doom, which he enchants onto the morph creature and blocks Wyleth. This has Wyleth dying, and after combat, Max then casts Sigarda's Aid and passes to Eric. Eric gets his Sylvan Library trigger again during his draw step, and takes another 8 to draw 3. He then casts Ulvenwald Tracker, and then Baru, and passes to Mika. Mika's got a Slitherboar pathway for turn, and then plays a morph creature for free, and then actually casts a morph creature face down. Going to combat, Kadena goes at Max, who takes a 3, and Mika passes after that. I draw and play a Reliquary Tower. I then play a Voldalian Hexcatcher off the top of my library thanks to the Reality Chip, and I then move to combat. I swing the Gale Rider Sliver at Mika, and I get an island, and he then takes 2. In my post-combat main phase, I cast Mistform Ultimus and pass to Max. Max draws and plays a Plains. He then casts Akiri, and as she comes in, suits her up with a Mask of Avacyn and Sword of Fire and Ice. Eric uses his library trigger but doesn't pay any life into it this time around. He then plays a Forest and casts an Emerald Medallion. He then pays 2 for Agrico's Uprising and passes to Mika. Mika draws and plays Trail of Mystery. He then plays a Terramorphic Expanse and decides not to attack and passes. I draw and play a Riptide Laboratory, and then cast Sol Ring off the top of my library. I then move Sword of the Anime onto the Mistform Ultimus, and I move to combat. I swing Mistform at Mika, getting to find an island, and Mika then takes 5. I then cast Phantasmal Image, and have it come in as a copy of Tribute Mage, which lets me tutor up a Swiftfoot Boots to hand, which I then cast and equip onto Mistform. I pass to Max after that. Max plays a Plains and then casts Leonin Shikiri, moving the Sword of Fire and Ice to it. He then follows up with Bruse Tarl, which can now target Akiri, and then swings Akiri at me. I chump block with my Phantasmal Image, and Max gains 4 life after it connects, and with nothing else, he passes. Eric gets his library trigger, paying 4 life into it so that he gets to keep 2 cards, and then plays a Forest, and then activates Castle Garenbrig, making 6 green mana. He then uses that to cast a Sifter Worm. Mika responds with a Keru Spell Snatcher, and counters it and exiles it instead. With that, Eric passes, and Mika cracks a Terramorphic Expanse, going to find a swamp. Mika draws and casts the Sifter Worm, which reveals a Nantuku Vigilante, and then gains Mika 4. He then plays a Sunken Hollow as his land for turn, and passes. I draw, and then play Rogue's Passage off the top of my library. I follow up with Master of the Pearl Trident, and then a Marrow Regery. I continue the Merfolk Onslaught by casting Glasspool Mimic, which enters as a copy of the Regery. I then play Thassa's Oracle, looking at my top 11, and putting 1 on top. I keep the Lord of Atlantis, and I cast that off the top of my library, and then play a Shapesharer. Moving to combat, I swing Mistform and the Voldalian Hexcatcher at Mika, and the Gale Rider Sliver goes at Max. I get an island for the Sword of the Anime trigger, and Mika decides to cash in 1000 Winds and transforms it, bouncing all tapped creatures. Going to my second main phase, I make a Shapesharer into a copy of the Regery, and then play the Voldalian Hexcatcher, which because of all the Regeries, I get to untap my Sol Ring 3 times. I then use the mana to help recast Mistform, and untap 3 islands, and then pass to Max. Max draws and plays a mountain. He goes to combat and swings everything out at me. I animate the Mutavault, and block the Leonin Shikiri with it, and put Thassa's Oracle on Bruse Tarl, and Mistform goes in front of Akiri. Max is able to move the Sword of Fire and Ice to Akiri at instant speed because of the Shikiri, saving her, and then plays Sajiri Selter to save Bruse Tarl as well. Unfortunately though, his Shikiri dies, as does my Mistform Ultimus, and Max then passes to Eric. Eric draws regularly, which is a bit of a change of pace for him, and plays an Oran Reef the Bastwood, which comes in tapped. He then plays Runandi Behemoth Caller, and follows up with a Seedborn Muse, passing to Mika. Mika draws and plays a Morph creature, getting a land off the Trail of Mystery, and drawing a card from Kadena. He goes to find a forest and plays it, and then passes turn. During his end step, Eric activates Baru to make a worm token, drawing a card, and then activates Oran Reef to put a counter onto it. Eric untaps with me, and I draw, and I have the Shapesharer become a copy of the Regery again. With the ability on the stack, Eric activates his Ulvenwald Tracker to have the worm fight the Shapesharer. I respond to that by bouncing the Shapesharer with the Riptide Laboratory, and once that's done, I play Wizard class off the top of my library. I then recast the Shapesharer, getting 2 Regery triggers, and untap my Sol Ring and Island, making it basically free. I then activate it again to try and copy the Reejerey. Once more, Eric spoils my fun with Beast Within and targets the Reejerey, which resolves before the copy. I decide to get some revenge on Eric at this point, casting Washout and naming green to bounce most of his board. He responds by activating Beru, making a worm token, and drawing a card, but his board still gets bounced. I then move the Sword of the Animist onto the Thassa's Oracle, and swing it at Eric. I deal 7 damage and find an island, and with nothing else, I pass to Max. Max draws and goes to combat. He swings Akiri at me for 6, which I can't block, and I take the hit. The Sword of Fire and Ice deals 2 to my Tribute Mage, and Max also draws a card. With nothing else, he passes. Eric draws, replaying Renandi, and then recasts a Sifter Worm, which reveals Elder Scale Worm as it comes in and gains him 7. He then follows up with Sylvan Library and goes to combat. He swings a Sifter Worm at me since it has haste from Renandi, and I take 10. Eric then moves to his end step, discarding a World Spine Worm and shuffling it in, and passes turn. At his end step, Mika decides to morph face up the Nantuka Vigilante, blowing up my reality chip. He then morphs face up a Weaver of Lies, and its ability has all their morph creatures that are face up turn face down. Mika's turn is quite quick as he simply draws, leaves his mana up, and passes to me. My turn has me leveling up Wizard class, drawing 2 cards, and I then play Emperor Mihail II and get to untap my Soul Ring because of the Reejerey triggers. I then have the Shapesharer become a copy of my Glasspool Mimic Reejerey, and once that resolves, I cast Sword of Light and Shadow, and then equip it onto the Thassa's Oracle. Moving to combat, I swing the Oracle at Mika, who responds by flipping up the Nantuka Vigilante, destroying the Sword of Light and Shadow. Mika still takes the rest though, and I get to find another island. After combat, I move the Swiftfoot Boots onto my Glasspool Mimic Reejerey, and pass. During my end step, Max casts a Valakut Awakening, and Mika responds to this by casting Sudden Substitution, swapping his Nantuka Vigilante for the spell, and resolves it himself. Max draws and goes to combat. Once more Akiri goes at me, and I take the hit, and Max's Sword of Fire and Ice deals 2 to one of Mika's morph creatures and draws him a card. Unfortunately, Mika doesn't have the blue mana to flip up the Kira Spell Snatcher, and it dies. With nothing else, Max passes. Eric draws and plays an Elemental Bond, and then casts an Elfheim Worm, drawing from the Bond trigger. He follows up by playing a Dryad Arbor as his land for turn, and then casts Primeval Herald. As it comes in, he gets to find a land, and also gets to draw a card from the Elemental Bond. With nothing else, he passes. Mika plays a morph creature face down, drawing him a card from Kadena, and then hard casts another morph creature, and then casts Scroll of Fate. He passes after that. I draw and play Kindred Discovery, naming Merfolk, and I announce I'll go to combat. Mika then takes this as a chance to blow up the Discovery, flipping face up the Inox Survivalist. Moving to combat, I swing the Thassa's Oracle at Mika again, going to find an island, and he takes 6. In my post-combat main phase, I then play a Gale Rider Sliver, and then an Archaeomancer, returning to hand Washout, and I pass. Max draws and plays SRAM, and then plays Sword of Truth and Justice, drawing a card from SRAM's trigger. He moves a new sword onto Akiri and goes to combat, swinging everything at Mika, and putting Bruse Tarl's trigger on itself. Mika blocks everything, and Max gains some life. In Max's post-combat main phase, he casts Promise of Loyalty, and I let it resolve. This has me keeping Emperor Mihail, Max keeping SRAM, Eric keeping Renandi, and Mika keeps one of his morph creatures that's been enchanted with Gift of Doom. After that, Max puts a Sword of Fire Ice onto SRAM, and passes to Eric. Eric draws and loses 8 life into his library ability, drawing 3 cards. He then plays Ronus' Monument, and follows up with the Wood Elves, and then a Topiary Stomper. This allows him to go into his library, and he's tutoring for a land, and in the meantime, lets him cast a Panglacial Worm from his deck. He decides to have all of the Monument triggers go on Renandi, and then the Panglacial Worm comes in with 3 counters on it, and haste to boot. Eric then follows up by casting Therith, and gets the Monument trigger, and puts it onto the Panglacial Worm. He then goes to combat, swinging the worm at me, and I take the hit, dropping down to 1. Eric then passes, and during his end step, Mika manifests a card from his hand by using the scroll, which turns out to be a Silumgar assassin as he turns it face up to kill Sereth. Mika draws and replays Kadena, and then casts Brainstorm. He then plays a morph creature for free, drawing another card. He then follows up with Ixodon, and all other creatures on the board are turned face down, and with nothing else, he passes. I draw and cast a Stunt Double, which comes in as a copy of Ixodron, turning Mika's Ixodron face down. I then suit mine up with a Swiftfoot Boots and Sword of the Animist. Going to combat, I make Stunt Double unblockable with my Rogue's Passage. But Mika responds, flipping Willbender to redirect the ability to one of his morphs. I consign myself to just swinging the Stunt Double at Eric, who chumps with a face-down creature, and I then pass turn. Max draws and plays a Glaring Spotlight, and moves the Sword of Truth and Justice to one of his face-down creatures. He then plays Resurgence to get 2 combat steps, and cracks the Glaring Spotlight to make his creatures unblockable. In his first combat step, he swings the face-down creature at Mika, dealing 6 and proliferating everything he can, and dealing 2 more to Mika's face. He then swings lethal at Mika, who in response turns up a Silumgar assassin and takes out one of Eric's face-down creatures. Max still gets the Sword of Fire and Ice trigger, and takes me out of the game as well, and he then passes to Eric. Eric draws and takes 4 from the library to keep an extra card. He casts a Brambleworm, gaining 5, and follows it up with a Seedborn Muse, and then Baru again. He puts his Ronus's Monument triggers on his face-down creature, and then plays Garruk's Uprising, drawing a card as it enters. Eric then finishes things off with an Uvenwald Tracker, and then activates Oran Reef to give all of his new creatures a +1/+1 counter. He also has the final Monument trigger go on the face-down creature once more. Going to combat, Eric swings the massive face-down creature at Max, who takes the hit and drops down to 42. With nothing else, he passes. Max draws and plays Aurelia the War Leader, and equips her with his 2 swords. Going to combat, he swings Aurelia, and Eric blocks the Brambleworm. Max then plays Fight to the Death, and trades Aurelia for the worm, and passes. And during his end step, Eric exiles the worm from his graveyard to gain 5 life. Eric draws and plays a Fabled Passage, sacrificing it for a forest. He then plays a Defiler of Vigor, and then uses it to help cast an Elder Scale Worm, which triggers the Defiler, puts a +1/+1 counter onto his entire team. Eric then follows up with a Krosan Grip, and targets the Sigarda's Aid, blowing it up. He then plays an Elvish Piper, which triggers the Defiler once more. He then activates the Ulvenwald Tracker, and has the Elder Scale Worm fight Max's face-down creature. And Eric then goes to combat, swinging everything at Max. He's put all of those Ronus Monument triggers on the face-down creature, which Max then takes to the face and drops to 13. With nothing else, Eric passes. Max draws and plays a Swiftblade Vindicator, and then casts Sword of Vengeance. He attempts to equip the Vindicator with the Sword of Vengeance, but Eric responds by fighting it with the Elder Scale Worm once more. With his plan foiled, Max then casts Akiri and passes. Eric draws and casts a massive Finale of Devastation, putting 13 to the X. This lets him go and fight his Opandrel, and he pumps his board with plus 13/13 and Trample, and with a massive board of creatures who are able to swing and trample through, Max dies to combat, and Eric wins the game. Game review time. This game was 1 hour, 52 minutes, and 19 seconds, and actually it was a lot of fun considering the length. I got to do a lot of cool stuff with my Mistform deck, including making multiple Regeries. With 2 on the field things get nutty, but with 3 things just get cranked up to 11, it is wild. My opponents were thankful that I only had the Soul Ring out, because if I'd had Nykthos out on the field and being able to untap it 3 times per Merfolk spell, things were about to get very out of hand. Mika's Kadena deck is exactly what I hope a Kadena deck is. He played a bunch of morph spells, got to cast that Trail of Mysteries which helps him find basics, flip some cool ones, and actually got to do a lot of fun stuff. Ixodron is always a great card in those kind of decks, even if it shuts off Kadena. I wasn't entirely sure what to expect of Eric's Baru deck. A lot of the worms I see in EDH are typically rare or higher, and Eric had gone into this game telling us that he was playing basically every single one, which meant a lot of common and uncommon ones as well. He seemed to struggle a bit early on, as indicated by the fact that he took so much damage from his Sylvan Library, but I think once things were going with the Elemental Bond and Garruk's Uprising, he was really cooking with gas. Maximus's Bruse Tarl and Akiri deck did exactly what I would expect from a Boros deck as well. It ran a bunch of equipment, geared up creatures, and basically tried to smash face. But I will say that as soon as that Sword of Fire and Ice resolved, I was in for a world of hurt since I wasn't going to be able to block. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, but it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.